Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Palo Alto, where we come to transform ourselves and each other and the world. Folks who are here online, you are welcome to keep your video on throughout the service. Mostly we'll keep audio off, but you'll want to know where that unmute button is for the end of the service. Also, online attendees, you can see the order of service by following the link in the chat. It has the words to the hymns and so on. If you're here on the UUCPA campus, you can scan the QR code at the welcome table when you come in. If you like an electronic order of service, or you can pick up the new one-page version. Thank you for your help with that, Green Sanctuary Committee. You can pick that up there. I have a couple of announcements for you. One is today is Second Sunday. That means Second Sunday lunch. So please do stick around and have lunch if you can. It gets served right behind the kitchen door there, and lots of seating around campus to enjoy our lunch together and get to know each other. And we always time Discovering UUCPA to follow after that, so you can join me in the library if you'd like to get to know me, the campus, the congregation, each other, and this session a little bit more about Unitarian Universalist history. And I also want to let you know that we have a couple of very important things happening next week. We have the EV Expo, lots more information in your order of service, so just follow that on through to the website and learn all about it. And we also have a celebration for Veronica's 30th anniversary here. I know, it's unbelievable, but that is how long Veronica has been our pianist. So we are going to celebrate her. You don't want to miss that service. And now, and I want to say Sarah left our special musician, left her home in a hurry. She remembered the violin, but left without her music. She is such a master musician that she did just fine playing everything by heart at the first service, but it does mean a couple of changes in the music. So if you want to know the details of exactly what she's playing for the second and third pieces that she's doing, come and talk to Sarah after the service. And now let us begin with our prelude. If you have a chalice there with you at home, please light it along with me. To face the world's shadows, a chalice of light. To face the world's coldness, a chalice of warmth. To face the world's terrors, a chalice of courage. To face the world's turmoil, a chalice of peace. May its glow fill our spirits, our hearts, and our lives. With our centering words each week, we draw on one of the many, many sources of this living tradition. Our centering words today are from U.S. American Buddhist nun, teacher, and writer Pema Chodron. Blaming is a way to protect your heart. Trying to protect what is soft and open and tender in yourself. As we follow the sound of the bell into silence, we allow ourselves to arrive here fully. Please rise in body or spirit and join in singing This Is My Song, which is 159 in the gray hymnal. Online, the lyrics are in your order of service. Let me never forget how much I missed hearing all those voices together. It is such a blessing after our 2 years with so little of that. Now is the time in our gathering where we turn our thoughts to whatever important events in our lives are bringing us a great joy or sorrow that we wish to share with one another. If you have a joy or a sorrow, you can always leave a card here before this point in the service, and or light a candle silently there. You can also send your joys and sorrows, even now, to joyconcern@uucpa.org. And of course, if you are online, please post them in the chat that's provided by Zoom. I'll read them out loud. Oh, now let us take a few moments of silent prayer and meditation to hold all that we've heard, it's so big. Even one story is so much to hold. How good that we have one another's hearts to take it in and help us to carry especially the burdens, but also to hold the joys that are so sweet our hearts overflow. We'll take a little time of silence for that now. Blessed be. Will you please rise and in body or spirit wherever you are and join me in singing, "May I be an instrument of peace." Those are the complete words. Now you're hearing the tune, and I'll sing it for you, and we'll sing it to you a few times. The tune goes like this. Is from scholar and longtime professor at Stanford University, René Girard. Fighting for an object is divisive, but then those fighting will reach the point where they are all fighting among themselves, and the competitive force will tend to move from one antagonist to another. As soon as two antagonists choose the same antagonist, there will be a tendency for one more to do the same, then one more, then everybody. And I would say what I call the scapegoat mechanism is the moment when all antagonists choose the same one, for no reasons that can be attributed to some external cause. The choice of the scapegoat, I would say, ultimately is random. It would be comparable to what we call a crowd effect. We all know that if you have a very agitated crowd, the crowd will tend to be looking for a victim. And the paradox is, fighting over an object divides people, but everybody fighting against the same antagonist can reunite them, because they can all destroy their antagonist together. Then they find themselves, in a way, reconciled. Therefore, that victim is going to seem to them to be responsible for the disruption first, then for the reconciliation.
No, 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 no,
21 years ago today. If you're old enough, you were probably exactly 21 years ago staring at the television, listening in horror to the radio news, calling up your nearest and dearest and sharing stories of grief, anger. It did not take long for the events of 9/11 to get that scapegoat mechanism that Gerard wrote about going. Four-star General Wesley Clark shares this story. About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the joint staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you've got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" You'll remember Al-Qaeda had already taken responsibility for the bombings. He said, no. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." Now, we don't know all the reasons why. Clark goes on to tell about how this anonymous source in the Pentagon shared a paper saying this was all part of a plan to attack and destroy 7 Arab governments over the course, Arab and one of them also Iran, governments over the course of 5 years. Maybe it is that issue of you've got a hammer, so you look for solutions that require your hammer, in this case, the US military. Maybe it takes into account a lot of Gerard's thinking about the scapegoat. What's for sure is within a year and a half, the US attacked Iraq, and over the course of the very long war there, killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, despite no connection, no personal connection, of course, but not even their government's connection with 9/11. Even the Afghan war, where there was a connection, bin Laden being known to be connected there and having claimed responsibility, even that was a scapegoating action. Those 2 decades of war about what we could have chosen to think of not as an act of war, but as a mass murder. You don't go to war over a mass murder. There are things you could do against the one much smaller organization that takes responsibility, but instead we aimed our fire, we, the United States, at Afghanistan, and then to the original action. I'll say the instigating action, the bombing of the towers and the attempted destruction of the Pentagon and the attempt to destroy a 4th target. That was a scapegoating action. What had most of those people to do with whatever bin Laden's complaints were? Terrorism is scapegoating. That's exactly what it is. Now, you've heard a pretty good explanation from the horse's mouth about what this mechanism of scapegoating is. I just want to say a little bit more about Girard's thinking on this. Kind of Girard in half a nutshell, because I'm leaving out a big, big part of his thinking, but just to focus on this bit. People want what others want. Might be an object, it might be resources, it might be land, it might be much more symbolic than that. For various reasons, and he has a lot of thoughts on this, people come into conflict. They want the same things, and they can't all have them. This conflict intensifies into violence, chaotic violence, the violence of all against all, until they find a victim, someone they can all blame. They scapegoat that person or that group. Often it's a group. Often it's a whole country, a whole ethnicity, everybody who wears turbans on their heads. We saw a lot of that after 9/11. And then they're unified in that scapegoating. Sounding familiar? Now, the other thing that happens we touched on a little bit in the end of that reading, is that the mechanism of scapegoating is concealed. It has this way of concealing itself because a story coalesces around the victim. This really doesn't want to stay along with my glasses. I need like super glue. There we go. A story comes around the victim in which the scapegoat is to blame, is an enemy rather than a victim. And this is very sneaky because then the pattern doesn't get recognized and it just gets repeated over and over again. Those doing the scapegoating, Girard tells us, they always think that they're the victims, that they're the ones who have been scapegoated. Once you start to watch for this phenomenon, you start to see it everywhere. Now, once the victim looks like a perpetrator, the scapegoating stops having quite so much effect and more violence continues. But again and again, people can choose this pattern of let's find somebody to blame, and that will temporarily resolve the conflict among us. So that can happen on a grand scale, like with 9/11 and the wars that followed. 2 global wars that killed far, far more people than were ever killed on that one tragic day. And another place we see scapegoating on a grand scale is in racism in the United States. It goes in many directions. Many people are targeted by racism, by nativism. But you can see one thread all the way through our history, since before this was a country, and that is the steady scapegoating, usually by white people of African descent. In very specific cases, such as, well, a lynch mob is exactly what he's talking about. Something happens. Maybe it's an instigating fact to make a community upset. Maybe there's been a crime or a crime has been claimed to have taken place. Or maybe that community is just under stress and in conflict itself. There are class differences among them. There are new immigrants among them. Something's wrong in the community, and they're fighting. The white people are fighting among themselves. And then they find somebody to whom they can turn all their violence. We will all lynch this man. We will be united in that. And then, for the time being, we will know who the enemy is. We'll repeat that over and over again, and you have individual acts of violence like lynching, like police brutality, And then you have institutional forms of violence that continue. Jim Crow, voter suppression, the toleration of police brutality, of two criminal justice systems side by side. And again, you see that pattern of the other being blamed. The one who has now been named the other, who's going to let us blow off this steam, whoever's in the need of this scapegoat. The scapegoat becomes the one to blame. They're the ones who are scary. They're the ones who commit crimes. They're the ones who attacked us. That kid who was shot by a police officer, well, if we can't find something to connect him to that conflict, that particular conflict, we say, but you know, he was arrested for dealing pot. We have him on camera having a confrontation with a convenience store clerk, and therefore he's to blame. We're not the scapegoaters. We were scapegoated, and now justice is restored. This is sort of the macro level, but it happens on a smaller level too. It happens within us. It happens within small circles of families. It happens in our own consciences, inside our own beings, every time something is awry and we're trying to find out who's to blame. So I'll share this story. I promise you this is a funny story because the two people concerned got along very well and loved each other very much. This is something my dad used to do. I remember vividly being upstairs in our house. He was downstairs cooking. I could hear sort of the kitchen noises of cooking. And then I heard this clattering, like clearly something had gone flying, was falling onto the floor, pots and pans, food, I don't know, some kind of kitchen disaster. And I swear, almost before the clatter, I heard a great cry go up. "Oh, for God's sake, Susan!" Which was my mom. My mother was not even in the house. My father recovered himself, cleaned up. There was nobody to blame but himself. But that sense that right away, something terrible has happened, I need to yell at somebody. And I'm sure if my mother had been there, he wouldn't have said it was her fault. He wasn't being irrational that way. He was just lashing out like we do. Like, I'm having a bad day, and we snap at somebody, and then we realize that was scapegoating. We wouldn't go so far as to say they're responsible for something going wrong at work, or they're responsible for making us drop something, and yet they're made to be the brunt of it. And then, I was all set with this sermon, and I was listening to this marvelous book, Vesper Flights by Helen MacDonald. You may know her earlier book, H is for Hawk. This is a collection of essays, and she read an essay, symptomatic, that she didn't use the word scapegoat, but it was exactly what I'd been thinking about and what Gerard is talking about. She was talking about the symptoms all around us of climate disaster. And she says, we have been conditioned by our times not to process some types of problems and solutions because they do not fit with how we've been taught to think about society. We've been led to believe we can make decisions that change the world in the supermarket, that only our individual decisions matter, that to bring about large-scale change, we should concern ourselves with the smallest actions, changing light bulbs, eschewing diesel cars and plastic straws. Defiance and change in process are collective acts, not individual ones. Massive, concerted cultural action is what we need, and that is what we should be hastening to organize. Now, she wasn't thinking about scapegoating, but what I heard, having this in my mind, as I said, you start to see it everywhere. I heard, we're scapegoating ourselves. We're saying, I've got a big, scary problem. I need to blame somebody, and so I won't take a plastic straw anymore. And I'm not saying, as I know MacDonald is saying, that we shouldn't make those small choices. Of course we should. Of course we should. but that we're not thinking as big as the problem is. This is what scapegoating does. It releases some tension for the short term, but it doesn't solve the problem. Did going to war against Afghanistan or Iraq make people safer from terrorism in this country? Over and over again, people like Wesley Clark are saying, things are worse. In Iraq, people have been radicalized. They never gave much thought to the United States, but now they know who the enemy is, and not surprisingly, it's the one who's dropping all the bombs on them. So, if you want to know what the real problem is, you got to get under that scapegoating process and say, what's really going on? Now, in the case of the environment, it's so big, and the problems are so big, and I don't mean that we should scapegoat some of the institutions that really do cause a lot more damage than your light bulb. Like corporations who have a vested interest in continuing to burn fossil fuels, and they are just going to do anything to make that keep happening, to make us keep doing that. Governments, ours and so many others that are just hand in hand with those corporations rather than defending our planet and what we need. These are the forces that we're up against, and I'm not saying that, we should start screaming at them and bombing them. What we need is massive concerted cultural action, and we can't be distracted from that. Not just to change the light bulb, but to commute using an electric vehicle. Come next week and learn about that if you're wondering if you can do such a thing. Find out more. Looking beyond the electric vehicles, that's great for your driving. Great, great, great. Do that. But what if we actually had a mass transit system that made us not so dependent on individual vehicles? We're talking about big systemic change here, and instead, straws. Not that there's any excuse for plastic straws unless you need them for a disability. But that's not going to fix our problem, right? Now, Girard talks about how this sacrificial violence itself can be a process of displacement, and that's good in a certain way. That he theorizes that long ago people used to sacrifice, and we know this is true to some extent, people used to sacrifice a member of their own community, right? An important member, child of a ruler, his favorite. That will calm down the conflict. We talk about it as appeasing the gods. He thinks that's all backwards. His theory of where the gods come from is absolutely fascinating, but, too much to get into. But he talks about, it gets more and more symbolic. We had that human sacrifice. Then we have the animal sacrifice. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And that in itself is displacing. Maybe we can move farther and farther away from this violence. But for that to happen, we have to acknowledge what's going on. It's vital that we see through the scapegoating mechanism and find another way to deal with the problems that made us go looking for a scapegoat to begin with. To go looking for ways that we can actually address them because they're real problems. So let's look for a moment at where the whole term comes from, where scapegoating, maybe not the first example of scapegoating, but where we get the term from. Maybe that will help us identify the need and some ways to address it. Here's the origin of the term. In the Hebrew Bible, listen and see if you notice anything strange. This is from an account in Leviticus 16, where, as happens often in Leviticus, God is instructing the people on the sacrifices that they need to carry out. They have various purposes. You sacrifice the first fruits of the field and the first animals of your herd and all that kind of stuff. Well, this one is specifically a sin offering. This is what you do when the people have done wrong. So, he says to the high priest, you are going to choose 2 male goats, 2 male goats, and you are going to decide by lot what is the fate of each one. One of them is going to be sacrificed in the usual way, and he outlines this is exactly what the high priest does. He cuts the goat's throat, he sprinkles its blood on the altar, and that is all about overcoming the people's sins. Not much about sin, though, mostly just a little description of, here's what you do. You see it a zillion times in this part of the Bible. Then the other goat, the live goat, the high priest, instead of a knife, he just lays his hands on the goat and he says all of the people's iniquities and transgressions and sins. It says that 3 ways, like to make it really clear. Iniquities, transgressions, and sins. And he speaks them all over the goat. And then the goat is led out of the community by somebody who's given that job. The person leads the goat far out into the wilderness and leaves it there. The live goat. Now, you see what's weird? The term scapegoat comes from that goat. The English term is short for escape, the goat who escapes. I don't know how well a goat would fare in the deserts of, what is now Israel, but okay, the goat is set free. That goat lives. His brother did not. And yet, when we talk about scapegoats, we're talking about this one. We're talking about punishment. We're talking about death. This live goat, he's never called a scapegoat. That's what it's called over and over again. He's called the live goat. That's the term in the Hebrew. The one who lives. That one's just sent out into the wilderness. Now, where and why, it's a little weird. There's a word there. This is the one for Azazel, and that's really confusing. Some people say that's a demon that was said to live out in the wilderness. Some say it's a name for the wilderness itself. Some say it's connected to the word for goat, so it just means the goat. Some say it means it's a sort of doubling of the word away, so it's saying away, because that's what that goat is doing. That's what the scapegoat is doing. It's not bearing a punishment for the people's sins and transgressions and iniquities. It's just taking them away. They have been confessed. Their priest says, here they all are. Goodbye. We can start afresh. That's a pretty good process, I'd say. In fact, so I was talking about how Girard says, we have this distancing. First you have the human sacrifice, and then you see it in the Bible with the almost sacrifice of Isaac. Then we have, let's just sacrifice animals. For most people, that's a step up. And then what happens after the temple is destroyed? Judaism has to transfer that to something else entirely. And where they used to have sacrifice, Jews now have worship services. And they follow, to some extent, the practice of the sacrifice. They happen in a certain order that echoes what used to happen at the temple now that there's no animal sacrifice anymore. Okay, so that's helping, from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice to let's just talk about it in words and song. And in fact, the ritual that I just described that's commanded by God to take place at a certain date every year, that becomes the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And you read this passage at Yom Kippur, which is approaching, to hear about, here's how we send our sins away. It's not a bad process, really. There's really just one thing I would say is missing from this ritual that people need. And that is, I don't want to sacrifice the goat. I'm sorry for the goat that got killed and sprinkled. But I mean the live goat piece. They're saying what their sins are. They're owning them. They're acknowledging them. They're saying, we want to push them away, not we want to ignore them, right? They just name them, so they're not ignoring them. They just want to say, I don't want to do that anymore. Go away. Symbolically, go away from my community. There's only one thing that's missing, and that's that you need to make some sort of amends, For many sins, there's amends to be made. And that's the piece that I would want to see in there. But otherwise, that's a pretty powerful communal atonement ritual. So what does that for us? What keeps us from scapegoating because it allows us to see what the problem is, right? That's what the people are doing. They're saying, this is what's wrong in our community. I cheated on my wife. I stole from my brother. I was harsh with my children and the people I work with. I've been unkind and uncharitable. I want to put that all in the goat and I want to stop. That's what's causing conflict in our community, is the things that we do wrong, the ways we hurt one another, and we're going to solve that instead of punishing somebody with violence. When I think about what we have in place, that ritual reminds me a lot of our winter solstice ritual. If you've never been, mark your calendar for December 21st this year. And we gather around, and there's lots of lovely parts of this lay-led service that's been going for a very long time. But one of them is the burning of the Yule log. And before we burn the Yule log, we each take a piece of paper and we write on it something that we want to let go of. I don't know if people would put it as a sin or a transgression, much less an iniquity, but it's something that we don't want to do anymore. And we write it down, because we don't, kill goats. We just write it down. We tuck it into one of the ribbons wrapped around the Yule log, and then we burn it. And we watch it burn. We do that go away part. And then, just as God commanded the ancient Israelites, we do it again the next year, because we're going to mess up again. We're going to say, geez, I have to burn that same one, or I'm doing pretty well on that one, but here's something else. Just like the Day of Atonement, right? But I think we need more than just that annual event. For one thing, it's not all that service is about. It's about a lot of things. And also, just once a year isn't enough. It's really hard. It's really hard to face everything you've done wrong, or even to remember it once a year. The more often that we build that into our processes, the less we will be inspired to take it out on somebody else, to scapegoat somebody, or scapegoat ourselves, or focus on some trivial part of the problem instead of the big problem that's before us. So I'd ask, what else helps you recognize when you are aiming blame somewhere other than where it really belongs? You're blaming somebody else. You're blaming yourself when, as Helen McDonald says about climate change, there's a big problem out there. It's not just about what you buy in the supermarket, right? When you're blaming one small piece of the problem and you're missing the big picture, what helps you to do that? I think the ancient Israelites had a great wisdom here. Not the abuse of a scapegoat, but a useful use of this process. In that they said, we need a ritual for this. It's really, really hard to face up to the things we did wrong. So we need a ritual that will really help it live in us. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to remember how it looked for that goat to go skipping out into the wilderness and away from us. I want to propose, and I know I've spoken about this before, so I'm going to start putting this into most of our services. A time in the service, take a deep breath, ex-Catholics, of confession. I don't mean confessing to the priests. We're not going to do it out loud at all. Because, when you do that and you start talking in terms of we, it's really easy. There's good reasons in Judaism and so on. There's a lovely thing about confessing to our sins, all of our sins. It's lovely, but, I'll just confess. I've done it myself. I've sat there thinking, we say, we have been unkind. And I was like, oh yeah, she's unkind. She's unkind a lot. One of us is unkind. It's not me. So I want that time to privately, in the secrecy of our own hearts, say, this is what I confess to. And then together, we say something that affirms we're here for each other. We'll help one another. You don't have to overcome it yourself. You don't have to face it yourself. You don't have to tell us, but if you're trying to make amends, we'll help you. If you're trying to change your ways, we got you. And you know what? We'll do it again next week. while you can still remember what you did just yesterday, what you did just Saturday, that, did it again. Because it's a lot easier to make these small course corrections, than to just do it once a year, much less ever. I believe that being able to confess to ourselves or to a very trusted friend or advisor, here's what I'm doing wrong and here's what I want to change. I think it can save us. I think it's our lack of our ability to do that. I don't mean Unitarian Universalists. I mean human beings. It's our lack of ways to do that and support in doing it regularly that makes us look for the enemy, that makes us scapegoat people, that makes us not even notice that we are scapegoating people. Until before we know it, it's a war of one whole racial group against another. It's a war of a whole country against another. And that's when the blood really starts to flow. We can make peace, and it can really, truly begin with us. May it be so for the sake of this world. We create this space, not only out of wood and glass, not only out of electricity and binary signals, but out of our presence. Wherever we are when we gather, we've chosen to be together, hoping that together we can do so much more to bring our lives and our world closer to what we dream. If we're moved by gratitude to each other, we may choose to support with whatever financial resources we can this community that we are creating and that is creating us. So the order of service always has a QR code and a link and information on how to use text to give via Give Lively. That QR code is at the welcome table as well when you come in, as is a box to receive your gifts if you prefer to give via cash or check. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
And the music will be Hole in the Wall.
Thank you. Will you please rise and join in singing Sif Amandla? We are not actually going to sing the it's a bit of a debate whether the title and the first line are from Zulu or Xhosa. We're going to sing the English. I'll sing a line, and you repeat it, and soon we'll be able to sing it all together. We're singing it a cappella because this came from the South African freedom movement, and it was sung as a chant in the streets. They didn't have a piano or even a guitar, so we're going to sing it like that. Ready? Oh God. I'm going to give you the whole line. Listen. Oh God, give us courage to withstand hatred. Oh God, give us courage to withstand hatred. Oh God, give us courage not to be bitter. Oh God, give us courage not to be bitter. Oh God, give us power and make us fearless. Oh God, give us power and make us fearless. Oh God, give us power because we need it. Oh God, give us power because we need it. All right, we're going to sing the whole thing. We are marching, we are praying, we are seeking the power and the courage to be strong and to do the right thing. Okay? Oh God, give us power to bring down prisons. Oh God, give us power to lift the people. Oh God, give us courage to withstand hatred. Oh God, give us courage not to be bitter. Oh God, give us power and make us fearless. Oh God, give us power because we need it. Gorgeous, gorgeous. Thank you. Everyone, please stay after the benediction for our conversation time. Hope you'll be able to stay for lunch today if you're here in person. Or hey, if you're at home, come on over for lunch. Those online will be invited to small group conversations in our breakout rooms, or if you stay in the main room by tradition, that's where we discuss the service. And we're all, wherever we are, going to begin with greeting time. A chance to speak to someone you haven't met before, or haven't seen in a while. Old timers, please see if you can greet a newcomer and find out enough about what brought them here to introduce them to someone else they'll want to meet. Now, if you're online, please unmute yourself, turn on your video. You might want to touch hands virtually like this while we say our benediction. If you're here in the main hall or on the patio, this means I'm with you. This means I'm with you and I'm also good holding hands. And we'll speak together. Go out into the world in peace. Be of good courage. Hold fast to what is good. Return no one evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Rejoice in beauty. Speak love with word and deed. Honor all days. Please stay and greet one another.